go backwards. Did turn this thing on, I think it's plugged in. All right, yeah. That goes. Yeah, we're talking about memory and eyewitness accounts. Of course, there's a process to remembering things. You have to encode it. How do you encode it? Then you have to store it. Where does it go when you store it? And then last of all, of course, you need to recall it or retrieve it. So when we're talking about encoding, a lot of times there was a lot of stuff going on when you saw whatever you saw. It's rarely a perfect situation. A lot of times you're scared. If there was a weapon involved, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. If there was, yes, sir.
What was that show you were talking about? Was the other class on Netflix?
Yeah, I was about to say that with 9/11 and someone
Yeah.
was even there.
Yeah. I just seen that the other day
Oh,
too.
was it a good
It was a good one, yeah, because they were talking about how, I guess just, I don't know, it was just talking about how your memory could be altered based on like your surroundings and
Right.
what was going on and stuff.
Yeah, and you know, the weird thing is that Trump claims that he saw Muslims celebrating in New Jersey, and nobody can find any evidence that the Muslims of New Jersey were celebrating.
What's the name of the movie?
What is it?
It's narrated by Emerson.
Yeah, it's like a little catchphrase, so it's like
Oh,
understanding the mind, or like, so it's like a little series, like 4 episodes. So it talks about your memory. Shoot, what were the other ones?
hold on.
She's pulling it up right now.
Oh, good.
It was very interesting though, like, this lady, she thought she saw smoke in her, she thought her classroom faced a window, she thought she saw smoke from the 9/11,
Right.
but in actuality, like, they looked at her class, like the way the building was and everything, she was 45 miles away, her classroom faced a window, but how did she remember that?
Exactly. Yeah. So she had encoded it incorrectly.
Called The Mind Explained.
Yeah.
What is it called?
The Mind Explained.
The Mind Explained?
Yeah.
So, do people remember or recall exactly what happened on this date?
Oh no.
No?
No, a lot of it
Or
is
you even voted them?
Yeah.
a lot of it's manufacturing.
I was in 8th grade.
Oh, okay.
They manufacture what happened because they want to be part of things, or they feel like they're part of things, or they're watching television and they feel like they experienced whatever they saw on television or thought they saw on television. People are still talking about people jumping out of the buildings, out of the World Trade Center. But I guess they only showed one person jumping out, or one person falling from the World Trade Center. With people saying, yeah, there were dozens of people that jumped. And you know, you could see them on television. Well, you couldn't see them on television. They don't show that kind of stuff. People falling to their death, they don't show that kind of stuff. They edited it out afterwards, so you had to see it live in order to see it the first time. But, you know, yeah, lots of stuff taking place. So, I mean, we're talking about eyewitness accounts, and the problem is a lot of times these are fairly inaccurate. She's holding that hairdryer as if it were a gun, and if you saw it and you saw her holding the hairdryer, you might think that it was a gun, and you would testify that it was that she was holding a gun. Of course, how they're feeling can affect how they encode something, depending on how much fear we're dealing with, how traumatized they may potentially have been. People in the United States, and this really confuses me, people in the United States who watched 9/11, watched it on television, developed PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, from watching it on television. even though they may have been thousands of miles removed from New York City or Washington, D.C., they were traumatized by it, as confusing as that is. That confuses me because I've been in a lot of situations, I've been in a lot of really odd situations, and I didn't develop PTSD. But here people were just watching it on television. I mean, how sensitive do you have to be to develop PTSD from watching something on television? It's like you could watch a scary movie and suffer from PTSD for the rest of your life, I guess.
Maybe they were sympathizing with the people they saw on TV.
Empathizing, sympathizing. It's possible. No, I mean, obviously something happened.
Could it be that some people made some kind of emotional connection to that? Is that why they would feel that way?
Potentially. And maybe I'm just a cold-hearted bastard. Okay, that's on tape. Maybe I'm just a cold-hearted bastard, but you know, it seems it seems odd to me. Being a medic and being around people that have been shot and stabbed and blown up, it seems odd to me that somebody would see something on television from thousands of miles away and be traumatized. I mean, I guess you could watch war events on the news and be traumatized by it. As confusing as that is to me, but it may not be confusing to you. The effects of stress are felt more acutely by those higher in anxiety and neuroticism. And obviously I'm not very high in anxiety and neuroticism because I don't seem to feel those things. We all differ in visual acuity and hearing ability. We all see what we see and hear what we hear. People like me who have really acute senses of smell, I react to smells as well. And that may be one of the reasons why I have the problem with mutton. Other people, they don't smell things. A third of the population don't smell sweat, body sweat. They don't. So if you're in an elevator with somebody that hasn't bathed in a couple of weeks, then they don't smell it. It's like a third of the population doesn't smell it. As confusing as that is. Different expectancies about events can influence how they are encoded. We generally have a tendency to see what we expect to see, and a lot of times, of course, our brain is filling things in. So we may not see what we think we saw, but our brain is telling us that's what we saw, because that's what we should have seen. So if somebody's talking about a gun, in this case, if somebody's talking about the fact that she shot somebody and we see her with a hairdryer, our brains may replace that hairdryer with a gun because she was holding it like a gun. And she is known to have weapons, or to use weapons. So our brain will replace that information, what we actually saw, with what we expect to see. Another problem is storage. We encode it one way and potentially we store it in another way. Memory fades as the retention interval increases. We go back over our memories from time to time. What do we remember? But where is this information? If you store it in a place, strange things that happened to me on the 24th of September 2019, then if you store it in that compartment in your memory, then potentially you will continue to interpret it as a strange thing that happened, or just an odd thing that happened, or something normal that happened. Post-event information can alter memories of an event. In other words, and that's what I'm assuming happened with the young lady that saw the smoke from 45 miles away, which is some amazing smoke if you think about it. But I've been around forest fires, and that'll travel a long, long way. I mean, it'll travel 100 miles, but it's usually up in the stratosphere.
Well, did they detect smoke even from the satellite images from space? You
yeah.
can see smoke, so it's not.
Sure, but for her to see wisps of smoke when she doesn't even face a window, now that's really tough. Her classroom didn't even face the window. So when she imagined that she saw the smoke, Now, it's possible, and I'm not sure how much smoke that created. Forest fire, of course, is acres and acres. It's hundreds, maybe thousands of acres of burning trees. That produces a lot of smoke. When I was in Montana, they had a fire over the glacier. And glacier is about 300 miles away from where I live. But we had a orange sun because of the smoke. They created that much atmosphere. We couldn't see the smoke except for the orange sun.
We have a lot of fires up there.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
We just recently had one in the glacier too. There was another one in the glacier, a big fire.
Which is sad. What else did we see? We saw an orange moon. It was directly overhead and it was orange because it was we were out of fish. So that was a mistake.
Where were you?
What's that?
Where were you at?
Well, my sister was.
Oh, you said Fort Belknap.
Yeah, we were for Belmont, and that's about
So it was or Valley.
right. When we went, my sister was on her farewell tour. She was dying, and so she wanted to see all this stuff before she died. So I took her to Glacier, and we were there during the fire. They scooted us out. We were there. It was moving. It was moving west. It's normally they move east. Everything moves east because of the wind. But this one was moving west, so they got us out of there. We were in the last row of cars that got left in that direction. Everybody else had to leave in the other direction. It's kind of fun. Anyway, yeah, we saw smoke. But it was from the fire. We couldn't feel the heat, which was kind of interesting. Okay, so if you talk to another person, that will alter your memory. You think, well, yeah, if they saw that, then maybe that's what I saw too, and I misinterpreted it. So you change the storage, and all of a sudden it's your memory. What was your memory? What was their memory actually suddenly becomes your memory. Post-event information that conforms to one's beliefs is more likely to be integrated into the memory. This is one of the ways that a lot of things happen, and people say it was a miracle. God came down and Jesus was here, and that kind of stuff. If you believe that kind of stuff, then potentially that will change the way you see things. So people will swear, I saw a miracle, despite the fact that it was whatever it was, but whatever your belief system is will fill that in. And this is the way it works with just about all memories, as exciting as that is. Viewing photographs of suspects after witnessing a crime can impair the eyewitness's ability to recognize the perpetrator's face in a lineup. The reality is you saw this person one time. They're not a friend of yours, they scared you. Potentially you weren't trying to look at them, because if you look at them, then you become a witness, and if you become a witness, then they may decide that they should shoot you or whatever. Should eliminate you as from being a witness.
It's crazy whatever you're talking about here, they covered in that show too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of an exciting show, wasn't it?
I like the dreams episode.
I know, that's pretty cool.
And they brought up Freud, and I'm like, oh my god. My boyfriend was like, what? You'll see. And in here showed all those images, and I'm
Yeah.
like, see? That's why I don't like him.
Why don't you like him?
They brought up Freud in the dreams episode. He's interpreting all these little symbols and all these items and what they meant. It was either
There's either a penis,
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
all
a
sexual.
phallic symbol,
sexual,
sure.
yeah, a lot of things. And I'm like, how do you picture that? Like, what makes you think that? That's what I was like, I don't even want to listen to this now. Let me zone out for a bit.
Oh, traumatized by shapes. The wording of questions can influence retrieval. Asking what was the man with the mustache doing with the young boy may influence your memory of the man. All of a sudden you may give the guy a mustache, despite the fact you don't remember a mustache. Maybe you weren't looking at that aspect. of the select individual. Unconscious transference, victims may pick from a lineup someone they've seen before, but who is not the actual criminal. So if they've seen them before, yeah, I know, isn't this weird?
There's one lady that talked about that. I guess they had a lineup of people who, I guess there's a person that, I think it was like a raped her or something. They had this lineup, but she just chose this random person. I guess it was people that were making her believe that it was this person because, or actually it was more the cops. The cops made her believe because, oh, is this the one, is this the one? So she, in her mind, she started to believe that. But then like, I guess years later, they did DNA tests and they found out it wasn't him.
I've got a couple cases like that in just a second. I know, it's exciting. 1981, a young lady in Dallas was held at knife point. She was cut and she was raped by this select individual. 2 days later, she failed to make an ID of the individual. After several days, she came back and picked Larry Fuller out of another pack of photographs. The reason she picked Larry Fuller, he was the only individual that was in both packs of pictures. And she recognized his picture from the day before. I know. So she identified Larry Fuller as her rapist. Larry Fuller was 32 years old, raising 2 young children alone, working several jobs to put himself through school. He served 2 tours in Vietnam and was honorably discharged from the Army. He petitioned the Innocence Project to look at his DNA evidence. The DNA evidence showed that Larry Fuller couldn't have been the rapist. Couldn't have been the rapist. She identified him because she saw his picture the day before. Fuller was the 186th person exonerated by the Innocence Project using DNA evidence. So eyewitness evidence is not very good evidence, unfortunately. And of course, now that we know this, we can discard the idea that eyewitness accounts are the best accounts. How psychologists study eyewitness identification, now this is a problem as well. Just because somebody's a psychologist doesn't mean that they know what the hell they're doing. Doesn't mean that their research is good research. Not all research is good research. And unfortunately, I've had this argument over and over and over again with people all over the country. If you're a researcher, you think that all research is good research. And if you're not, then you question some of the research that you read. And that's one of the reasons why when you look at your article critiques, I want you to be critical of the research. Were there enough people? Was it a biased selection of individuals in the research? I want you to look at that because some research isn't very good, and they publish it anyway. And that's a good thing. I mean, they need to publish all this research, but we need to recognize the difference between good research and poor research. The experimental methodology, the researcher manipulates some of the variables, the presence or the absence of an instruction to participant witnesses, and measures its effects, the likelihood of losing someone, choosing someone from the lineup. The advantages of this type of research: the experimenter knows exactly what the witnesses experienced because they're the ones that manipulated what was going on. This is known as ground truth. So if I am manipulating all the variables, that's a good thing. That's an advantage. Now there are disadvantages to it. Disadvantages that the experiment may lack ecological validity. In other words, the environment is not a real environment. And because it's not a real environment, it's superficial. It's relatively superficial. So the question comes up, how in the world do we do research? And the answer is the best way we possibly can. But there are going to be advantages and disadvantages to any piece of research. And some of it's good, and some of it's bad. Now, sometimes we make generalizations about what we have done and what we have found, and sometimes we shouldn't make those generalizations. Let's say, we can say that. So when you read your research, a lot of times you're going to be looking at research that potentially isn't really very good research. It's unfortunate, but in academia, they force people to do research. And they, you know, it's publish or perish is the idea. So if you work at a high-end institution, then you have to do research. You have to figure out some research to do. So you'll do just about anything. And some of this research isn't very good. Some of it's tainted. And some of the conclusions that you're making aren't really true.
So how many research that's done by Duquesne College is actually published?
Oh, well, we just started doing research here.
Oh,
Dr. Kine was in charge of that. And she's only been, she was only here for about 6 years. And she started that about 2 years after she got here. So there's not a whole lot of research coming out of Duquesne College. But there may be in the future. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. We're going to argue about this afternoon. This is a good thing and a bad thing. It's good that we care and that we want to do research looking at this population specifically. That's good. But the bad thing is that we're forcing academics out of the classroom and to do research. So, okay. We're a 4-year institution now. That means that everybody has to teach 4 classes. However, if you're doing research, that reduces it down to 3 or maybe 2. And if you do enough research, you're not in the classroom at all. We've all watched The Big Bang Theory. There's a reason why none of those people are in the classroom. They're all research scientists.
Oh.
They're all research scientists. But they're at a teaching institution. But none of them do any classroom teaching.
That makes sense. Okay.
Okay. We can do the same thing
So
here.
why do they have all the time on their hands?
The same thing could potentially happen here. We have an individual, we have an individual that doesn't teach, but he's doing research, and that's all he does in our department. So here we are, we're paying him whatever we're paying him, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, and we're not getting any teaching out of it.
But is he actually doing research?
He says he does.
No.
What is he researching?
He's Native American studies, so I'm not sure what it is. It has to do with business and the Navajo Nation. So he's trying to increase the amount of businesses on the reservation.
That's good.
That's not going to happen by one person. It takes the whole government to change the system.
I'm not the one to talk.
I sure like to read his research and critique it.
We'll see what happens. Archival analysis involves after-the-fact examination of actual cases. For example, investigate what could have led to mistaken verdicts. The advantages, it uses real-life situations. The disadvantage, it can only document what happened in those cases, and it cannot explain why it happened in those cases. They can only guess. Field studies combines the rigorous control of an experiment with a real-world setting of archival analyses. Advantage it may have more ecological validity than an experiment because it's in the environment where it actually occurred. The disadvantage, because we cannot be certain whether a suspect is guilty or innocent, we cannot distinguish correct identifications of the guilty from incorrect identifications of the innocent. We've already talked about several cases where an individual was executed despite the fact that there was evidence that said he wasn't guilty, but they executed him anyway. The reality is, if they convict somebody of a crime, they wash their hands of it. They don't want to look at it again. That case is gone. The more time they spend wasting their time looking at an old case is the less time they have to deal with new cases. So a lot of times they won't do it. A lot of times the courts won't do it. Remember, we're talking about justice here, we're not talking about truth. We're talking about the law and what the law says. And sometimes you get on the wrong side of the law and you're in prison and you don't have a choice, despite the fact that the truth is you didn't do whatever it is they say you did. Wells in 1978 created a taxonomy of to categorize variables. System variables are factors under the control of criminal justice system, such as instructions given to eyewitnesses viewing a lineup. The estimator variable, factors beyond the control of the justice system, and whose impact on the reliability of the eyewitnesses can only be estimated. The lighting conditions at the time of the crime. And of course, you just saw a film. What can you tell me about the person that we saw? Where were they?
Wait, what?
Where was, I just showed you a film, and I showed it to you over and over and over again. Who was there a person?
Like a pregnant lady.
I'm sorry?
Is it like a pregnant lady?
It was a pregnant lady?
Yeah.
Okay. What was she wearing?
A grayish dress.
She had a gray dress on?
Yeah, she's standing in front of a garage door.
Okay. What color was her hair?
Like a, what do you say, like a dirty blonde kind of?
Dirty blonde?
Yeah. It's not
Okay.
really blonde, it's more brownish.
All right. What did she have on her feet?
She didn't have shoes.
She didn't have any shoes. That's good. That's good. You got it almost right on the nose.
Ask her again in a couple of weeks.
No!
Yeah. Yeah, she's barefoot. She is pregnant. Her hair's dark though. Her hair's black. Yeah. But she is pregnant. She's got a skirt and a top on. It's a gray
Oh, okay.
gray skirt and a black top.
I can't see that well.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play my eyesight, not my memory.
Okay. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Okay. But you got almost everything right. I mean, you could identify this person. You knew that she was barefoot. You knew that she was pregnant. And you knew that it was a female, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. Just misidentified her hair and her outfit. But you did identify the fact she didn't have any shoes on. And a lot of times the lighting is this bad. It's at night. Criminals like to commit crimes at night because it's dark and things are misidentified. If you see a blue car at night, it looks black. If you see a green car at night, if it's a dark green car, it looks black. So it's really hard to identify colors at night. Okay. Post-diction variable does not directly affect the reliability of an identification, but it is a measurement of some process that correlates with reliability. For example, the confidence that a witness feels for an identification. So we just saw something. Wait a minute, let me go the other direction. Here we go. Oops. So who was the person that we just saw a picture of? Male, female?
Male,
Male? What was the male wearing?
a wedding dress, or a gown,
It was a guy wearing a wedding dress
and a wig.
and a wig. Okay. What do you have on his feet?
Can't tell, his gown is too rims.
He was under a street light.
I was gonna say that. Which one are you talking
I know, that's what I was thinking.
about? I thought it was
Which one are you talking
a
about?
work outfit.
Okay, let's see.
It was red.
I saw it. Yeah,
Oh,
wet
okay.
it,
I don't know if that's a wedding dress.
It's
I've been
not-
married
it's not
3
a girl.
times.
You showed me the lineup, that's what I was referring to.
And I'm not sure, I can't even, I don't know if those are boots or if they're socks and I think it's a female though. I think it's,
Yeah, it's a female, looks like her hair is braided.
oh, she's got that braid that comes across her chest. I'm guessing. But I wouldn't identify that as a wedding dress. I've been married a couple times and I never got married. My spouse didn't have anything on like that. Let me think, what did you have on? Yeah, I have to remember what my ex-wives were wearing when they got married. I can't even remember. Eyewitnesses are usually better at recognizing and identifying members of their own race or ethnic group than members of another race or ethnic group. This is kind of weird. We recognize people from our own group, but we don't recognize people from another group. This is known as other race effect. Racial attitudes do not appear to be related to other race effect. It's really kind of weird. It all depends on where you grow up. If you're native and you grew up in a white community, then you're probably able to identify white people. And you're also probably able to identify native people. Let's say you grew up in Chicago and there were Hispanics at your school, and there were African Americans, and there were natives, and there were white people at your school, then potentially you can identify people. It all depends on who you've been around. If you have never been around a select group of individuals, you tend to think that they all look alike, as confusing as that is. So if you've never been to Japan, if you've never lived in Japan, and you see somebody that's Japanese, you think all Japanese people look alike. They kind of do, they don't really. Just,
Is that how you would see the nation or the people that you're around?
well,
Or can you distinctly tell?
you have to remember that I lived on another Indian reservation for 10 years, so that's not the way I see it. That's not the way I see it. But if I had just, if this were my first rodeo, this was my first powwow. Wait a minute, you guys don't powwow, what am I talking about? This were my first reservation, it might be difficult for me to identify people, or to see people, or to see them differently. So, yeah. Why does the other race effect occur? Physiognomic variability, a cognitive interpretation. Facial features are different. We see people's facial features as stereotypical. So when we look at, people say that African Americans have big noses and wide faces and thick lips. Of course, not all. I was just looking at the Will Smith's family, Jada Pinkett Smith, her family. Well, they don't have thick lips at all. They don't have wide noses either. They have small noses. If you look at the Jackson 5, Michael Jackson's family, before Michael had his nose fixed, he had a fairly wide nose. He was not an unattractive man. For some reason, he decided that he wanted to look more like Peter Pan. Anyway, physiognomic variability, in-group and out-group differences. This has to do with social interpretation. As I told you last time, I think it was in this class, I was talking about Southerners and Southern white people and Southern black people. They don't ever look at each other. They don't interact very well with one another. And when I was down there, I'd say hello to everybody because I'm stupid, I guess. Anyway, I had no problem with anybody, but of course everybody had a problem with me because I was interacting with the other group. They didn't like that. They never looked at each other, as bizarre as that may seem. So if you ask a Southern, this was in Columbus, Mississippi, if you ask somebody from Columbus, Mississippi, who's white, what a black person looks like, they tell you, well, they all look alike. Because they don't look at them. They just identify their race, and that's it. And their brain cuts off after that. Faces of one race differ from faces of another race in terms of the type of physiognomic variability. White faces show more variability in hair color. Black faces show more variability in skin tone. Skin tone is very important as far as black people are concerned. They identify people by how dark they are. The first movie that Spike Lee ever made was about the fact that a lot of people on a campus would date the lighter complexioned individuals. In other words, the more attractive people at the institution were the people that were the lightest had the lightest skin tone. So if you're around black people, a lot of times they identify people by how light or how dark they are. This is true of a lot of different groups. When I was in Japan, the Japanese white folks, they cover up a lot. They cover up so that their skin doesn't turn dark, which seems weird because when they go to Hawaii, they lay out on the beach. But the rest of the time, they're all covered up. They're even wearing gloves sometimes. But they'll always wear long sleeves, and they have a hat that covers their faces so their faces don't become dark. White people, on the other hand, a lot of white people, especially in the 60s and 70s, before we started developing a lot of skin cancer, everybody wanted to be tan. You know, the blonde-headed, blue-eyed surfer dude with all the nice and tan. So white people want to be dark, and people who have a darker complexion want to be as pale as possible. It seems that way around the world. The Chinese are that way, just about every place you go. So if you are in Japan and you are actually darker complexion, if you're Japanese and you're darker complexion, they assume that you work out in the field. You're a lower class person. It's strange as that may seem. Why are we talking about this? Well, it's just different places. People are different in different places. For eyewitnesses to correctly identify members, I don't know how it is here. I don't know how you guys do this. Whether you want to be darker or whether you want to be lighter, I don't know. You seem to wear a lot of clothes. And they're usually dark clothes. Not me, I'm obviously not from here. I have a red shirt. But you always wear black. For eyewitnesses to correctly identify members of other races, they must focus on the characteristics that distinguish that person from other people of the same race. So if you're looking at a black person, and you are trying to identify that person, what you need to look at is their skin tone. That's how African Americans identify each other, by the darkness of their skin. White people identify themselves by the color of their hair, which gets a little confusing sometimes. White eyewitnesses should look at skin tone when identifying a black person, while a black eyewitness should look at white hair color. Now, as far as black people are concerned, their hair is almost always the same color. If we're talking about indigenous peoples, your hair is pretty dark. It's either black or really dark brown, right? Some people have red hair. There are some black people with red hair. It's interesting as that is. I know. Malcolm X had red hair. Guess what his nickname was? Red. Yeah, it was Red. Malcolm X. That was before he was Malcolm X. Everybody called him Red. He was a pimp. Research by Goldinger, he and Papish in 2009 monitored eye movement of people that looked at a series of faces. The researchers discovered the subjects fixated more on distinctive features when viewing own race faces than when viewing different race faces. So if a white person's looking at a white face, they will see all the features of their face. If they're looking at a black person, then they will not see all the features of their face, because they're trying to identify the race first. The race is the most important thing. Social psychologists also explain the problem of identifying other race faces through the in-group, out-group phenomena. When confronted by someone from our own group, we focus on distinguishing features. When confronted by a person from another group, our initial attention is to identify their group. Are they one of us? That's what you're trying to identify initially. And it takes time to do that. Have you ever seen somebody on television you couldn't figure out what race they were? It happens all the time. And it seems to be, once upon a time, everybody on television was either black or white. Now all of a sudden we have black people that are married to white people. We have Asian individuals that are married to to people of another race. It's getting really interesting, and we see some people that we can't tell whether they're black, white, or somewhere in between, and usually there's somewhere in between. There's a lady with the most gorgeous afro on one of the commercials, and she's running around with a guy that has black hair, but he's not of African descent. I can't remember, it's a Wells Fargo commercial. And they keep eating out and they're spending too much money. So Wells Fargo tells them not to do that. And she's got an afro. Well, who has afros? Who has hair that's that tight, that kinky? Well, no, not white people, not Asian people. Anyway, so she's probably has some African ancestry. So the interesting thing is this is one of the things that we try to identify, is we try to identify people by their group. As confusing as that is. Is it confusing? Is this what we should do? Do you guys identify, you look at somebody else who's indigenous, do you try to determine if they're Navajo or if they're some other indigenous group? Or do you just assume that all indigenous people are Navajos? Come on, I'm confused. There's Apaches around here, there's Hopi around here, there's, geez, guys from Laguna, there's Kiowas, there's Comanches. Well, I got Comanches, he's gone now. But there was a guy here that's, his dad was Comanche. His mother was Navajo. Now this gets confusing. So as far as the Comanche are concerned, he's Comanche because they're patrilineal. And as far as the Navajo are concerned, he's Navajo because you guys are matrilineal. I know. So when he goes to Oklahoma, where his dad is, he's embraced as a Comanche. So do you try to identify people? Can you identify people by how they look? Do people from different tribal groupings? Can you?
Very little, because sometimes you can't, and sometimes you can. So, I don't know. I guess if you need to identify it, then yeah, but if not, it's just kind of like a novelty kind of thing.
You just assume everybody's a Navajo.
We just assume everyone's not Navajo, but like American Indian of some sort. And usually you can tell by whether they're from the eastern side or south.
So when I go to Walmart and Gallup and people keep running into me with their carts, am I supposed to assume they're all Navajos? Or
No.
can I tell by looking at them what?
Not at a quick glance, but I'm pretty sure if you just sit there and people watch for a while.
Usually I read their T-shirt and if it says something, then I figure
Which
they're from
chapter,
that
which
tribe.
tribe, yeah.
Anyway, okay. And the other question is it important? Is it important?
Yes.
I don't think so. Do I look now? Am I out?
No. You already told me. I don't remember a lot of things, but I remember what people told me about their heritage. And I keep asking that question. It's one of the questions I asked in cultural psych, I asked it in counseling class. Because I want you guys to understand culture and how culture may play a part in counseling.
My mom was stopped one time, like, she was at a store and some man was like, "You're not from here, are you?" And she's like, "No, I'm from near Pinyon." And she was at many farms. And then that guy's like, "Your shirt's really white."
Well, where we live, the water's so dirty that we can't turn something white. Okay, you're brand new. It's too funny. Yeah, I don't know what to ask
But
this.
if you were among a group of Navajo, you wouldn't stand up.
I'm sorry?
I said if you were within a group of different people, you would stand out more.
Oh, sure, well, of course I would, because my hair's white, for one thing. Unless Wilson's standing there beside me, then I'm okay. We're gonna have a meeting this afternoon, and I'll probably sit with Marius and Patrick and Jeremiah. Yeah, I'll be the only white guy there.
Does that ever bother you?
No,
No?
should it?
I'm just wondering.
No.
No?
They're my friends, so, you know, if somebody's your friend, they're your friend. Doesn't really matter what everybody looks like. Except Patrick has got that high and tight thing going. I don't know about that. That's oh, so does Jeremiah. Jeremiah's got a high and tight too. It's this marine thing you guys got going. Wait a minute, Marius has a high and tight. Okay. The evidence for greater effects, and I'm the only military guy, and I'm the only one without a high and tight. The evidence for gender effects is not overwhelming, but tends to indicate an own gender bias, at least for women. When women see other women, they look at them. They look at them a lot. So if they look at a guy, they just look at his butt. I guess I'm not sure. I don't know what you guys are looking at. But if they look at a woman, they see crow's feet around around the eyes. They see wrinkles in the forehead. You know, they're trying. I don't know why you guys do this kind of stuff. Older eyewitnesses and younger children make more errors than younger and middle-aged adults. They're more likely to choose someone from a lineup in which the culprit is absent. Why old people and why young people? Why don't they identify people very well? I'm sorry, I think
Is it one has limited vocabulary and one has limited sight?
Now, why wouldn't an old person be able to identify someone? And why wouldn't a young person be able to identify someone? What are they looking at? This has to do with sex. Oh, let's think of it again. It has to do with sex. Young people are too young to care about sex. Old people are too old to care about sex. That just leaves the people in between. So when a 30-year-old man looks at somebody, they're looking at them either as somebody that they have to compete against, or they're looking at them as a possible reproductive partner. If they're female, if they're male, they're looking at them as somebody that they may potentially. Does this make sense? And old people don't care; they're too old to be reproducing anyway. And children are too young; they haven't gone through puberty, so they don't identify. Does that make sense? And it may be subconscious. Maybe that's why they're looking at somebody for an extended length of time. Maybe it's subconscious. They're sizing them up as a reproductive partner, if they're the opposite sex, of course. And if they're the same sex, they're looking at them as a possible somebody that they have to compete against. Okay. In recent years, police have begun to incorporate procedures recommended by psychologists and others for interviewing eyewitnesses and constructing and presenting lineups. Despite the fact you hate Freud, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. I mean, not the thing about Freud, but a thing about sex. I mean, it never goes away. It just can't go away. Because that's just what life is. And we can pretend it's not there, and we do. I mean, the Victorian era, they changed the name of table legs because leg was too offensive, because it made men think of women's legs, or women think of men's legs. So they called them limbs instead of legs. As stupid as that is. But you can't get away from it. It's there, it's always there, and there's not a whole lot we can do. In 1999, the U.S. Department of Justice recommended procedures for collecting eyewitness evidence, procedures based on psychological research studies. So psychologists, in this instance, psychologists were the ones that were able to get law enforcement to recognize the fact that eyewitnesses were very often inaccurate. So if we're looking for eyewitness information, accurate eyewitness information, we needed to come up with a plan. The landmark decision by the New Jersey Supreme Court in 2011. Now here's the bizarre part. We can look at all this stuff, and what we have to identify is the fact that before 2011, eyewitness accounts were fairly inaccurate. After 2011, now we have criteria as to how we're going to do this. So the New Jersey Supreme Court in 2011 issued a new set of rules for cases involving eyewitness identification. The decision lists more than a dozen factors that judges could consider in evaluating the reliability of eyewitness identification. How accurate is it? I mean, you're going to convict this person on an eyewitness account, so we need to make sure that that eyewitness is accurate. One of the questions that they asked was there a weapon involved? If there was a weapon involved, people tend to focus on the weapon, not on the person. So they can tell you that it was a Smith & Wesson revolver, 5-shot, 44 Magnum Smith & Wesson weapon, but they can't tell you what the guy's, whether the guy had a mustache or not, or what color his hair was, or potentially what color his eyes were, because they were focused on the weapon, not on the guy. How old do you think this guy is?
65?
74.
He's got awfully white hair. He's awfully wrinkled up. I don't know. Yeah, he's probably my age. How old is this guy? According to the New Jersey State versus Henderson in 2011 ruling, when a defendant presents evidence that a witness's identification may be unreliable, the judge must hold a hearing to consider the issues.
Family emergency.
I've lost someone. What did he say when he left? I didn't hear
Has
him.
a family emergency.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's horrible. The judge must hold a hearing to consider the issues and must give detailed instructions to the jury about the pitfalls of the eyewitness evidence. This decision is expected to have a nationwide impact, so the judge can determine that the eyewitness is inaccurate, that we can't, and we won't allow the testimony to come to court. So this just started in 2011. We have seen a real change in courts as to eyewitness accounts since 2011. As shocking as that is. Interviewing eyewitnesses in a standard police interview, one relies on a predetermined set of questions with little opportunity for follow-up. Okay, so we just saw a picture of the guy, not him. What race was the individual that was just in the picture? What race was he? Come on, the first thing you look at is whether they're Navajo or not. Was he Native?
No.
What race was he? He's black, okay. What else do we know about this guy? What color was his hair? Most
Looks
likely.
like black.
He had black hair? Did he have black hair? Okay.
Eyebrows were weird.
He had black eyebrows?
I don't think
He didn't have any
it was
eyebrows?
weird though. That's what I looked at first. Like,
His eyes were,
How
it
about,
was weird.
yeah.
was he wearing a hat?
No.
No hat?
I thought he was.
Was he?
Yeah.
Can you identify the hat?
No. I don't know what's on the hat.
All right, okay, let's go back.
Oh, his hair was green.
Green. But you're right, he had no eyebrows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't know what color his hair was. Well, his eyelashes are black, so his hair's probably black if he doesn't paint it green. And we missed his pearl earrings, or diamond earrings, I'm not sure which one. Anyway, Philadelphia Eagles was his hat. As fun as that is. We're not very good eyewitnesses, are we? But we identified him as African American.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Got one thing right.
There you go. And his eyebrows. He got his eyebrows right. In a cognitive interview, the interviewer establishes rapport with the witness, then asks the witness to provide a narrative account of the event, and finally probes for details with specific questions. Now, the interesting thing is, if we watched a television show from 20 years ago, we would see different interviewing techniques. We're actually seeing this type of interviewing on television, this cognitive interviewing, where they allow the witness to talk about what they saw, and then they start probing questions. The interviewer allows the witness to direct the subject matter and flow of the questions of the questioning. They interrupt infrequently and listen actively to the witness's response. And this is what we actually see on television. And this is just since 2011, as bizarre as it may seem. So despite the fact that the people that write television shows aren't always actually police officers, we're still seeing this type of interviewing technique. The interviewer may cue a witness to mentally reconstruct the physical and emotional experiences that existed at the time of the crime. So they want to know about their feelings. Their feelings are very important because that can color their eyewitness account. The interviewer may direct the witness to form an image of the situation, recollect sights, sounds, smells, and physical conditions. For example, was it hot? Was it cold? How dark was it? And recall any emotional reactions experienced at the time. This becomes very important. In the old days, they didn't care about your feelings. Policemen were not psychologists, and they certainly didn't care about your PTSD. But now, of course, we understand that emotions can color what you see and what you remember. If you're scared, and most guys will not admit that they were scared, despite the fact that they were hiding just like everybody else. They just won't admit it, and because of that, of course, they give a tainted account of what they saw, or what they potentially saw. When the witness has mentally reconstructed the event, the interviewer asks for a detailed narrative and then uses follow-up questions to probe for specific information. And this is what we see on television as well. This actually takes quite a while. So normally we either get to the end of the interview where they start asking questions. That's usually what happens. Witnesses are sometimes asked to recall events in different temporal order. In other words, sometimes they go, instead of going in chronological order, they go in reverse chronological order. They may ask them to see it from a different perspective or from the point of view of a different person. What do you think that person saw? The cognitive interview has been shown to generate substantial increases in correct recall, though it can also produce a small increase in incorrect details, especially when they ask them about other individuals. It turns out that females are better eyewitnesses than males are, because males are always trying to, they never want to admit that they were scared. They don't ever talk about feelings. And because of that, a lot of times they made things up because they're trying to get the interviewer to think that they weren't scared. As stupid as that sounds. An investigator should instruct the witness that the offender may or may not be present. Without this instruction, eyewitnesses may assume that their task is to pick someone out of a lineup. So they choose the person who looks the most like the perpetrator. And this is what happens in lineups, as weird as that may seem. In a traditional lineup, all lineup members are shown to the witnesses at once, and this is known as simultaneous presentation. There is a problem with simultaneous presentation. A lot of times people, if you ask a small child about their friend, they'll tell you, Sally's my yellow friend. What is she talking about? Well, she's talking about the clothes that Sally wears. She wears a lot of yellow clothes. So she has a yellow friend. My grandson's best friend is Grayson. His name is Grayson. It's not because he wears gray clothes, but that's actually his name. But Grayson is also a Green Bay Packers fan. And that's why he's good friends with my grandson, because my grandson is a Green Bay Packers fan. Despite the fact that he was born in Florida, and he lives in Iowa, and Green Bay is way, way up near the Canadian border. I have no idea why Green Bay is his favorite team. So everything that he buys is green and yellow, as weird as that is. But Grayson is his friend because he's a Green Bay Packer fan.
Cute.
It's cute. He's a Green Bay Packer fan.
So,
We won't go into this. An alternative to simultaneous presentation is a lineup that is sequential, where an individual, just one single individual comes out. The witness makes a decision about each lineup member before seeing the next one. A lot of times, like I said, a lot of times it has to do with clothes. People aren't looking at people's faces, they're looking at the clothes that they're wearing. Women are very good at identifying clothes, but they're not very good at identifying men's faces. No. Or men's height. The manner in which a lineup is presented can affect the accuracy of the identification. In general, sequential lineups result in fewer identification attempts, so both mistaken and accurate identifications are reduced in sequential lineups because they're seeing each individual in sequence. Why are there more mistake IDs in simultaneous lineups? In a simultaneous lineup presentation, eyewitnesses tend to identify the person who looks the most like the culprit relative to other members of the group. And this is known as relative judgment. As long as the perpetrator is in the lineup, the relative judgment process works fairly well. So what will happen is, as the people are coming in, they're saying, well, yeah, he kind of looks like the person. His ears are the same size. The next person will come in. Yeah, they kind of look like the same person. His head is the same shape, but that's not the guy. And so they're identifying features that they remember from the individual. And then when, of course, the individual is, if he is in the lineup, then they're able to actually identify the individual that perpetrated the crime. But as people are walking through, they're actually identifying select aspects of that individual that are similar. But if the actual culprit is not shown, a positive identification may still occur because someone in the group will always look the most like the culprit. So what they're saying is this person looks just like that person, but his skin tone is a little too dark or a little too light. We have if you haven't been around a lot of African Americans, if you just see them on television, a lot of times you have a difficult time identifying different African Americans. And this is because television is not very nice to African Americans. Their skin tends to glare. So you really don't get a good idea of what their skin tone is. And this makes it very difficult. So people are used to seeing individuals that don't really look like what the person actually looks like if you're dealing with African Americans. In a sequential lineup, the eyewitness compares each member in turn or to his or her memory of the perpetrator, and on that basis decides whether any person in the lineup is the individual who committed the crime. And this is, of course, would be absolute judgment if that person is actually in the lineup. The lineup is typically conducted by the detective who selected the fillers and knows which person is the suspect. If you've ever watched these things on television, a lot of times they identify a policeman as the criminal. Lineup administrators, and of course that's funny, we're supposed to laugh at that. Lineup administrators' knowledge of the suspect's identity can increase the likelihood that an eyewitness will choose someone, more likely the administrator has failed to provide instructions that the suspect may not be in the lineup. And of course, that's one of the things that they need to say. Ideally, the lineup should be administered by someone who does not know which person is the suspect. Eyewitnesses sometimes express increased certainty in their identification as a result of events that happen after they choose someone from the lineup. For example, if eyewitnesses receive confirming feedback from the lineup administrator, a confidence expressed by the eyewitnesses is one of the most compelling reasons why jurors believe such identifications are accurate. I need to stop right here just for a second and ask you guys a question, because this is going to come up this afternoon. How many of you guys are going to graduate this year?
Next year or next spring?
I'm sorry?
Next spring or
This spring, yeah, this spring. I'm sorry. You're going to graduate in the spring. You're going to graduate in the spring. You're going to graduate in the spring. Have you taken and you're going to graduate this spring. So have you taken any 400 level classes? Are you taking either 497, 498, or 499 right now?
499 and 413.
You're taking those both of them right now.
I've already taken one and now I'm
So you've already taken 498,
99.
499. So you're going to graduate. You're going to graduate.
I'm taking 413 right now.
413. So you'll be taking a 490. You already took that. Okay. All right. Okay. That's the problem we're having right now. Well, we only have 2 instructors. Right now I'm teaching a lot of hours. And they're talking about cutting the number of hours I get to teach next semester. But if you do that, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to. People aren't going to be able to graduate. But the 3 of you, you haven't had a 490 anything.
Wait,
So you're going to have to take it in the spring.
so does that mean like people who are like me who have been taking those more advanced courses, we're not going to be able to graduate soon?
No, that does, well, maybe.
So what do we
That's what
do?
the argument is today.
Can I make that argument? Because that's ridiculous. They're just getting rid of teachers left and right and they're expecting us to be
They're not
okay
getting
with
rid
them?
of them, they're just not coming back.
I think they are just getting rid of
They're
it.
just getting rid of them. That's what I'm saying at this point. They're just pushing him into a corner.
Like Sue,
Can you be part of the argument? No, this is I'm going to be part of the argument, but I need to be your advocate. How many more hours do you have to go?
I need like just 12 more classes. I should be done by this time next year.
This time next year?
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll be taking a 490 class in this spring? Yeah, you'll take it in the spring. Right? You're going to take a 497, 498, 499.
Yeah. Because I'm taking a 400 class right now,
Right.
which is Dr. Ami's class. I'm
Right.
taking 413 right now.
Right. But you need to take 497, 498, 499. Okay. And you'll be doing that in the spring.
Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
we should be part of the argument because we do bring in the money.
Why is it so hard to understand that if there's no students and faculty, there's no college? Like, I don't understand that.
And I think it's not fair for students have to wait for certain classes.
I agree, and that's what that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sure that everybody gets to graduate on
I
time.
mean,
That's
you're
why we
supposed
need
to
to be
follow
part
a
of the
degree
argument.
plan. It's supposed to be a 2-year, then a 4-year
I should-
degree.
well,
or it tends to be
We'll see what
longer.
happens this afternoon. If
We need
there's
to
a
be part of
problem,
this meeting.
if there's a problem, I'll tell you guys, and you can go petition Garrity and
I think
Russell.
we should. I mean,
Well, that's what we're going to have to do. I mean, this is ridiculous. They don't want to pay me overload pay. Right now, I'm teaching 29 hours.
But they basically made you.
But certain
No, they didn't make me. I
individuals give
volunteered to
themselves a
do it.
pay increase. That
So-
doesn't make sense.
So what they're asking me to do is to not turn in some of my hours so that I.
so when,
No,
if
it's not.
some
That
of
has
us
to do with me being.
are not going to graduate because.
You're going to
it's not
graduate.
structured,
You are going to graduate. You already had your 490 whatever class. So what classes do you need?
I still need to take a 201, 390, or 360, and the other one's a Navajo class, so they're all lower
Okay.
than 400.
All those, the
Except for
Navajo
one.
class, we don't have a problem with. It's the 300 level classes that we're gonna have a problem with. Unless
The
they let me.
360, that's the one you're gonna teach, right?
That's the one I'm going to teach.
Well, you're going to teach it.
And I've got to teach a 400 level class so that we can get those, well, not just Cheyenne, but everybody.
Who oversees the BA program? Obviously, someone's not doing their job.
Well, the guy
to
that's
ensure
in
that
charge.
instructors are available.
It's the dean,
Who's the dean?
Lerma.
Bring him in.
So what do you need? Carly, what do you need?
I need I need 350, 360, new Navajo courses.
Okay.
And there's something else, 241.
The 241? Okay, that's the.
Maybe
I want to
Dr.
say.
Lerma needs to go.
Well, he's gonna be in the meeting, so what do you need?
I'll be done by December.
Oh, you'll be done by December, so you're clear. We don't have to worry about you. And you two guys, we do. And we need to make sure you get your 490 whatever class. Okay.
I'm not even on the same review checklist as these people too. I'm still.
You're on the new one?
I'm still on the older one. That's another problem I have. I'm not taking the same courses everybody else gets to take.
What's your purpose?
It's the one with most of the Navajo courses, but they don't include the new courses that they're offering. The new one doesn't have the Navajo courses, but they do have the new courses. I just can't take it.
Yeah, we have
I
a new
to get a
checklist.
copy.
And you're on the old.
That's another
What do you
issue.
need?
I'll be done by the checklist too, I think that's what I
Uh,
They update the checklist for all the students. They have to stay with the year that you're doing or
well, we can argue that.
Can we like sign all of our names and say these are the people who have a problem to this Dr.
Dr.
Lerma?
Lerma.
Well, let's have this meeting. Let me argue our point during the meeting today.
Have you guys taken a survey of how many students are going to be graduating?
Right.
How many are
Last year,
taking 400
we had more
classes?
graduates than anybody else, and that was my point. My point is that,
That's because you guys have instructors that were here for them.
right,
Now, half of your faculty's gone, and how
That's
do you
right.
guys expect to move forward with this BA program?
that's my
And
point.
who in administration is not getting this part?
I'm pretty sure they're just trying to get rid of this program to make room for a program that's already headed in a different
Probably would have
direction.
been after.
They don't want to get rid of
Yeah.
this program. This is the most successful program they have at this institution. But
Why are they?
we need to remind them of
Why
that.
are you treating us less than that?
No, they're treating me that way, not you.
They're discriminating against some of us.
I don't know about the discrimination part. Well, okay, yeah, now I know what to argue about this afternoon.
Also the instructors too, even look up for the students too, are being
Yes.
Criticized and they're being let go. Yeah, the ones that are there for us.
Well,
Can you argue that part for us too?
oh, sure.
For sure?
We
Or
vote
do
you
you want
to
us
be
to
the
go
dean
there?
first.
No, you guys can't.
Brewster
go-
and Dr. Lomas out.
No, I don't
What
want
time was your
to.
meeting?
I don't want to do this job.
What room is it in?
No, don't worry about it. I'm your advocate, and I've already told him all of the things you're telling me, I've already told him.
This is so exciting because it's
Instructors,
like,
we need them.
they're like, we care about the students, blah, 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 X, Y, Z, but it's like, these are the situations and there's no solution. And it's just
And the
creating more.
The solution seems to, the question seems to have to do with money, which is kind of irritating because.
But yet they can put millions of dollars into this NHC.
The redecoration.
Like, that is
Yes,
stupid.
exactly.
Well, they're putting money into something else too, and that's what we're going to argue about this afternoon. So let's wait until the meeting today. If there's a problem, then I'll tell you guys about it. I'm not going to keep.
Well,
you
if
in the dark.
nothing's going to be done, I think the students need to start petitioning
If nothing's going to be done,
and protesting.
yeah. get fired.
No, we're speaking our mind, you have nothing.
I know,
to do with
they can't fire you, but they can fire
Yeah, I
me.
can
But
fire
that's
you.
okay, I don't mind being fired, I'm gonna retire pretty soon anyway.
The wife wants you home anyway.
I've
Well,
already,
just hang in there for us, because we need to graduate.
well, I can only do what they'll let me do. This semester, I'm teaching a whole year's worth of classes. So what he was saying earlier was that I will only teach one class next semester.
360?
No, 497.
No, you need to teach 360 as well.
Well, what he's proposing is that they bring in an adjunct to teach for 360. But
Meaning,
But
It has
don't
to be a
they require-
PhD.
Yeah, don't they require a person to have so many credit hours in
Exactly.
in a psychology program in order for them
In order
to
to
be APA compliant?
Exactly.
that's another thing that's stupid too. Jeremiah doesn't even have his PhD yet. But they got rid of a lot of teachers down in GCB just because they didn't have a PhD. A lot of students have to either not go to school or transfer just because of that. But they're making Jeremiah teach courses. That's a lot of hypocrisy right there. They don't even know that students have to pay.
Jeremiah can only teach 200 level, 120 level
You
classes.
shouldn't be teaching at all if you're not good at teachers. In my opinion, because that's just not right.
Jeremiah's a psychology professor. He doesn't teach science. People, they got rid of their science.
But still, that's not right.
What happened to the president of the college? Where is he in all this?
Oh,
Why
I don't know.
why is one person allowed to make these decisions?
I don't know. The only person I get to argue with is Dr. Warren. So.
What if student council, that's who we're voting for, who we did, right? Don't they do anything? What's the point of them then? Are they just there to just say hi to people and that's it? They don't solve problems? I'm just kidding.
They're
Look,
only there
let's-
to have
let's-
fight.
Wait until this thing's plays
Now
its-
we're just upset.
plays
We
itself
don't
out.
even want to learn.
I don't want to. We tell Dr. Varner we want to hear from him what the plans are.
Well, I'm going to talk to him this afternoon.
Bring him in here.
We have a huge meeting, and sometimes I get angry, and then I swear. Oh.
It seems to be that way, that like the person who
Lisa.
tries to stick up for the students gets ostracized and they let go.
Just
Just
like
to cover and co-sign their BS so they can continue doing what they're doing.
Sure.
And that's exactly what we need to see.
I'm so glad my mom does not work here anymore. She was a very good instructor, but because of everything that was going on, she was like, I love my students, but I can't. And it
Yeah.
sucks.
We're gonna get expelled from this.
Oh, you guys aren't going to get expelled. I'm going to get fired. Yeah,
Is
okay.
this all recorded?
Yeah.
Bruce, you cannot post this one. You gotta edit it.
No, I can't. Studies have shown that witness confidence is not a very good predictor of a witness's accuracy unless it is measured immediately after an identification. Asking witnesses to provide a statement of their degree of certainty before giving them any feedback can be an effective way to eliminate the problem of false confidence. They are sure that this is the guy that did it. Remember the case in Dallas in 1981. She identified John Fisher, or something, his name is Fisher. She identified him and DNA exonerated the guy. Obviously it wasn't him. She was white and he was black. And she did not identify him correctly. Why don't we stop right here, since we're all upset anyway.